Hello everyone, I'm Charlie Ely and this is my third and final video lecture for your Performance in Context Contemporary Dance module. These videos are designed as introductions to theories about dance that you can then apply to your work of a particular practitioner or to your own work. This video focuses on contemporary ideas of postcolonialism, ethnicity and cultural identity, looking at examples of recent intercultural contemporary dance practices outside the UK. Since the 1960s and the early days of postcolonialism, there are many ways in which our understanding of nations and of cultural relations have changed. By the 1980s, many more postcolonial and developing nations entered this world of capitalist globalisation. Now, this brought positive changes in the form of improved technologies, better infrastructure, communications, and access to artworks from across the world. Whilst these international exchanges are positive at the surface level, a major problem remained in the binary separation of East and West, of white and other, of rich and poor nations, and it kept power concentrated in the hands of a few. Since the 1990s, these issues have increasingly been addressed in public discourse. Terminology is a good insight into this. We now talk about the global north and the global south rather than east and west to better reflect the geographic realities of rich and poor countries. Most recently, we've been using the term global majority to reflect the fact that non-white people make up a bigger proportion of the world's population and therefore deserve to have their voices taken seriously. It's also interesting to consider how these labels and related concepts of race, ethnicity and nationality are used in conversations about contemporary dance, a highly diverse art form with practitioners across the globe. How do these labels affect the marketing of, reviewing of and audience perceptions of contemporary dance? A key term for contemporary postcolonial thought is hybridity, drawn from the ideas of Homi K. Bhabha, who in the early 90s identified both cultural and historical hybridity as essential characteristics of the postcolonial world. Postcolonial hybridity can often be seen in the performing arts through interculturalism, another key word which simply refers to the blending of artistic forms from at least two distinct cultures. One of Bhabha's other crucial ideas is that to have a healthy contemporary society, we need to look at the lives of those on the margins and examine the way that minority cultures are treated within nations, seeing their rights and representations as a benchmark for global progress. Taking that into consideration, I want to look at the work of Bangarra Dance Theatre, an Australian Indigenous dance company. Making up just 3% of the population, Indigenous Australians are very much a minority in the country today. Bangarra was founded in 1989 by an African American, Carol Johnson, but in 1991 an Indigenous Australian, Stephen Page, took over as artistic director, and he continues to lead the company today. You may remember the importance of kinship from my first lecture on the cultural dances of the Tiwi. With this in mind, it is telling that one of the core Bangarra values is kinship. They say, "We are committed to supporting and nurturing the Bangarra clan," and clan is an Indigenous word. The fact that Page's brother, Russell, was the company's lead dancer for many years, and brother David, the lead composer, really embodies this philosophy of kinship. In terms of style, in their own words, authentic storytelling, outstanding technique, and deeply moving performances are Bangarra's unique signature. They always incorporate Indigenous traditions and at the same time explore issues facing the Indigenous population in a modern urban environment. The Page family, many company members, and indeed many other Indigenous Australians grew up in poor working class urban areas, very distant from and often with little knowledge of their ethnic traditions. Dancer Lillian Banks explains of her hometown. There's traditional dance in Broome, but most of it is really simple steps. A lot of the knowledge has been lost. It was taken away. So Bangarra is at one level a project of cultural reconnection and of developing a hybrid sense of cultural identity. Crucial to this is their networking with elders from different indigenous clans and the input of traditional performer and cultural consultant Jakapura Nanyuran, who Page says is instrumental in guiding the sense of traditional authenticity through the works. Aesthetically, you can really see the mesh of cultures in the presence of both elevated rises and low to the ground movements. Every year, Bangarra aims to operate on 3 levels of engagement. They do an international tour to, in their own words, maintain our global reputation for excellence, a national tour performing in the top theatres of Australia's different state capitals, and a regional tour, allowing audiences in more rural areas to experience the company's work. This seems like an optimum way of working to maintain their financial sustainability, but also having a commitment to reaching Australians in marginal communities. The ability to work in this way is partly an advantage of being a minority organisation working in a highly developed country, and really contrasts with the experience of many dancers and choreographers from the global south who struggle to find home audiences for their work. In 1997, they collaborated with the Australian Ballet Company on Rites, a new version of the Rite of Spring, focusing on, as Michelle Potter puts it, a conceptual, choreographic and visual examination of landscape. It was the first time that Aboriginal trained contemporary dancers and classical ballet dancers worked together, and fits the definition of intercultural performance perfectly. Their work was integral to the Sydney 2000 Olympics opening ceremony. This clearly shows that, Indigenous Australian culture was part of the face that modern Australia wanted to present to the world. Another important idea to consider in relation to contemporary post-colonial performance is that of intersectionality. The term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 as she discussed the specificity of being both black and female. She argued against, and I quote, the tendency to treat race and gender as mutually exclusive categories of experience and analysis. Crenshaw's term has since been taken up and expanded to refer to any 2 or more elements of individual or social identities. It asks for precision in our understanding and for an acceptance of hybridity as a core component of human experience. In post-colonial discussions, race, ethnicity and nationality usually come to the fore, which is understandable as colonialism was about territorial dominance and the subjugation of peoples who in these ways were other to the colonisers. Unfortunately, this has tended to dampen the discussion of other crucial aspects of identity, such as gender and physical ability. In a body-focused discipline such as dance, these physical identity factors can be crucial to our understanding of movement choices and aesthetic ideas. A contemporary post-colonial choreographer who brings intersectionality into her work quite radically is the South African Mamela Nyamza. In South Africa, as in Australia, ballet and other Western forms of dance have a long history, although the violent system of apartheid, which didn't formally end until 1991, kept black and white dancers in separate spaces. Young enough to train post-apartheid, Nyamza in many ways had a conventional start in the dance world. She did a diploma in ballet, got a scholarship to study at the Alvin Ailey Dance Theatre, joined the South African State Theatre Dance Company, and landed some roles in international musicals such as We Will Rock You and, of course, The Lion King. She began making her own work in 2006, which invariably challenges constructions of racial and gender identities, dominant notions of blackness and of womanhood. In 2009's Hatched, as dance scholar Christina Johnson observes, she references her classical training and subverts it in order to expose and problematise the whiteness contained in this aesthetic code. She deconstructs our expectations whilst highlighting her hybrid cultural identity. at one point doing Padabure Kuru, showing a mastery of that form, as she balances a heavy load on her head, a stereotype of the African woman, which she also masters. Both of these movements, these activities or tasks, are also coded with gender and speak specifically of women's work. In 2012, Nyamza collaborated with British theatre maker Majisola Adebayo on I Stand Corrected, an intercultural and interdisciplinary performance work. The piece addresses issues of homophobia and rape, drawing from Nyamza's experiences as a lesbian woman. In her own words, the piece is dark, strange, witty and absurd. She says, "You might think I've lost my mind when you watch it. I play a ghost in the piece because I have been killed because I am a lesbian, and so I am coming back to correct myself." The self-exposure on stage is particularly radical in a South African context. Whilst legally the country is a global leader in protecting gay rights, in reality much of the country is morally conservative and violent homophobic attacks are all too common. In this piece, Nyamza works with all of the intersections of her identity to create something that is both entirely personal and resonant with the experience of many marginalised groups. Outside of her choreographies, Nyamza is also an outspoken critic of the South African dance industry and its politics. Even after winning the country's top award for young artists in 2011, she revealed that she hadn't received any in-country funding for years. Whilst this is slowly changing, it is notable that her latest piece, 2018's Black Privilege, contains critiques of patronage and hypocrisy in the art world and was commissioned by the Triennale, a German festival. As globalisation keeps increasing, threatening to homogenise the world and its cultures, whilst at the same time certain forms of insular nationalism have been on the rise, activists, thinkers and artists have been searching for antidotes to these forces. We've seen international solidarity through protest movements such as Occupy, Me Too and Rhodes Must Fall. The concept of cosmopolitanism, simply outward-looking rather than an inward-looking philosophy, has gained importance. Some Africanist thinkers have taken the concept further, speaking of the Afropolitan. A major proponent of Afropolitanism, Chielozona Eze, calls it a new ethics of being. He says, and I quote, "We need new names because we have new stories to tell about the world. These stories acknowledge those of our ancestors, but also expand them to contain our extended arc of existence. Unlike most of our ancestors, we have white husbands and wives, we have Asian brothers and sisters, and all of this takes place on the African continent." Leading critical theorist Achille Mbebe sees it, I quote, "going beyond Pan-Africanism. It's about interior mobility as much as exterior mobility, about how cultural identities in our joined-up digital world are much less defined by national borders than they used to be. It speaks to the fact that so many African national borders were arbitrarily drawn. And I think it's a good term for explaining the worldview of many African contemporary choreographers and dancers. Rwanda's Amizero company are a great example of this. Amizero is the country's first professional contemporary dance company, formed in 2005 by students at the University of Rwanda. These young people were still struggling with memories of the Rwandan genocide in 1994. Some of them, including artistic director Wesley Ruzibiza, grew up as refugees in the Congo or other neighbouring countries. For Ruzibiza, the decision to go into the arts professionally was partly, in his words, to be the bridge to many cultures and to contribute towards creating a loving, more tolerant society to prevent the disasters of the past. Since the 1990s, Rwanda has seen vast quantities of international development assistance, and its economy has been prospering. Many new possibilities have opened up for its young people, particularly because they speak English, the new language of education, French, the colonial language, and Kinyarwanda, the national language. You can see this hybridity even in the name Amizero Compagnie, which takes the French formulation. Amizero are interested in creating flows and networks, a key Afropolitan idea, in contemporary dance. This is exemplified by their founding in 2012 of the East African Nights of Tolerance. Whilst they are by no means the only young company in the region to run a small festival, they are the only ones to have explicitly framed it with this idea of regionality. There is a strong element of professional collaboration, exchange and training to the festival. For example, for the 2018 edition, Ugandan choreographer Kathy Nakaweza was brought over to work with 4 young dancers to create the first all-female contemporary dance production. In the beginning, their audience was mostly European and American expats, but in recent years it has become 80% local audiences. The company's 2017 production, East African Bolero, is by far its most ambitious. The concept is inspired by the 1928 ballet Bolero, composed by Maurice Ravel. Ruzibiza's decision to update this piece using the original classical music composed for a large orchestra is a bold and very unusual choice for a contemporary African choreographer. The original story was a very simple tale of a gypsy dancing in a Spanish tavern, gradually beguiling the whole crowd to join in. Ruzibiza has reconceptualized it entirely with a new mythological narrative about the creation of man. East African Bolero combines contemporary idioms with cultural dances from the region, with its dancers selected from across Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania and Uganda. In a part of the world where tribalism has been a huge problem in recent decades, this kind of regional unity, shown through movements that respect cultural heritage and the past, with a vision of the future, is fairly groundbreaking. Lastly, a recent development which I think is very exciting is Ruzibiza's appointment as a co-artistic director of École des Arts, along with Alessandro Soutin, a choreographer who was born in Zimbabwe, raised in Belgium and trained in the UK. Their appointment as the first leaders of the school outside the Akoni family has great significance. And the choice of a man and a woman, one from Eastern Africa, one from Southern Africa, to me perfectly encapsulates the Afropolitan philosophy. In my opinion, the companies and artists outlined above represent the best of a contemporary, international, cosmopolitan, or even Afropolitan point of view. And at the same time, in making stage performances for local, physical audiences, the liveness of their work gleefully resists globalization. Their works also clearly show how in modernity, cultural identities are never fixed or stable. They are always hybrid and in a process of adaptation. When thinking about dance in the modern world, particularly as it becomes more interconnected and networks become more complex, it's really important to consider the contextual and material circumstances that may impact on each artist's success. Artworks, of course, don't appear out of nowhere, and the realities of access to training, international exchanges, venues, funding, and digital technologies all have a huge impact. Whilst the work of such artists are beginning to redress power imbalances between people of the global north and global south, between white people and people of the global majority, there is still a lot more to be done. And taking a critical approach to performances that engages with postcolonial theories is perhaps a good place for dance artists to start. Thank you very much.